Hello, Haunted Family. Welcome back. Story 1. The People Outside. When I was in high school, my girlfriend's parents would let me stay the night. On the weekends, as long as I slept in the RV that was parked in the back outside. I had done so multiple times. My girlfriend would come outside and stay with me until she got tired. And then she'd go inside and fall asleep. And I would listen to my Walkman while I tried to fall asleep. I remember one night I was having trouble falling asleep. This was not unusual for me. But as I lay there, I started to notice an unfamiliar background sound. I removed my headphones. I realized the sound was coming from outside. And it sounded like people having a really loud discussion. But the number of voices started to multiply and get louder and louder until it was unbearable. I searched around, peering out the windows, but there was no one there. I was very shaken at this point and decided to run into the house and sleep in the living room. And just try to explain myself in the morning. Problem was, every time I got about 6 feet away from the RV, there'd be a flash of white, and I'd open my eyes and find myself back in the RV. Now I was nearly having panic attacks. So I called my girlfriend on the phone. She could hear how terrified I was. So she told me that she was coming outside to get me. I heard the back door of her house open. I heard her walk across the deck, down the steps, across the garden stones, and finally her hand fumble on the RV door. But when it swung open, there was no one there. I'm now pretty much in tears and suddenly felt the presence of something behind me. I turn around and I found this massive red aura hovering there. I was overcome with immense sense of death and dread, and I could not breathe. It was like I was being strangled. I remember feeling like this aura or energy was trying to kill me, like it was absorbing my life force. I don't even know if that makes sense to you. I dropped my knees. I realized that if I didn't break free from this thing really fast, I was going to die. I don't know how I found the strength, but I willed myself back to my feet and slammed the RV door open, and I bolted for the house. And this time I actually got inside, hollering for my girlfriend, not caring who I woke up. She came running down the stairs, with her mom at her heels, to much confusion. I explained everything that had happened to me, getting especially angry that my girlfriend never came outside like she had promised. She said that we had never spoken on the phone, and that she had no idea what I was talking about. We compared our phones. Mine showed, at 1:25, a conversation, complete to the phone, while hers showed absolutely nothing. That's when her and her mom started taking me very seriously, and began to look very scared themselves. The rest of the night was uneventful. Her mom let me try to sleep on the couch, but try as I might, I couldn't fall asleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I would see a small circle of intensely burning white light. I never spent the night again. Story 2. My grandparents. I'll start my story when I was a baby. My mother had a lot of health problems. I spent much of my first 4 years in the home of my great-grandparents. When my mother wasn't in the hospital, they would frequently stay at our house. I found out later that it was to protect me from her sometimes violent and erratic outbursts and behaviors. Jump ahead to the spring of 1982. I was 12 years old. I spent the night at a friend's home. It was a dark and stormy night. The three of us were laying in our sleeping bags in the living room, in the back corner of her home. We had turned everything off, not that it really mattered. The power went off at 10:45. We had been laying there maybe a half an hour when I noticed the hazy images of my great-grandparents. They had been dead for several years at this point. One friend covered her head, while me and my other friend just stared. The images grew brighter, and it seemed like they were inside a glowing ball. We could hear some of the storm from outside, but it was like we had cotton over our ears, muffling the storm, insulating us. It seemed like my great-grandmother was trying to say something, but there was no sound coming from them. The glowing sphere around us seemed to mesh with the walls gradually. So now the walls of the room we were in were glowing. Then the walls seemed to tremble. My friend's dad awakened at that moment, yelled for us to run to the basement as he himself ran down the stairs. The moment we left the room, the glow disappeared, the sounds of the storm returned, and the walls collapsed. A tree had fallen on the house. The next day, when we had calmed down, my friend and I talked about what we had seen. I wrote a description of my great-grandparents, as I had last seen them. She had very long, jet black hair. She was 83 years old, and she dyed her hair religiously. She kept it in braids wrapped around her head like a crown. One of her eyes was very clouded by cataracts. The other was strikingly dark green. Her skin was pale milky white and deeply lined. My great-granddad looked like skinny Santa Claus, with a fluffy white beard, slightly bald on top, but plenty of white hair on the sides. I asked my friend to describe what she had seen, and when she finished, I handed her my descriptions, and she was amazed that the descriptions were so similar. When I got back home, I found a picture of them tucked into my mirror. That might not be significant if it was a picture from their wedding day. And this picture was supposedly destroyed in a house fire 75 years earlier. I am convinced that what we saw was the spirit of my great-grandparents, protecting me even in death, like they used to in life. Story 3. The House in the Woods. This happened when I was 13. I grew up in the backwoods of Texas. I'm talking there was a huge forest behind our acre of land, and it belonged to the National Preserve. That kind of backwoods. My sister, who was 8 at the time, wanted to go walking in the woods. It's something that we did frequently. Somehow we always knew where we were, even if we walked for an hour or more. We always knew how to get back home. It was weird, but I digress. We tell/yell that we were going to the woods to our mom, and she yells back that we needed to be home before dark. Typical parent stuff, you know the drill. Before we set off, we had been building this makeshift fort a few hundred feet in and decided to check it out. But we got bored of that pretty quickly and decided to pick up our walking sticks and go for an adventure. We were a good 30 minutes into our walk when I noticed it was getting darker. I started to ignore it when my sister hits my arm. Up ahead, through the dense foliage and trees, we see what looks like a clearing. Now, I knew this part of the woods well, and I knew that we were still on the preserve land. There weren't any clearings that should be nearby. Thinking maybe it was just sunlight illuminating a spot, I convinced my sister that we should go check it out. It turned out to be a clearing. The sky was still pretty dark, and the wind picked up. The tall grass was rustling all around us. However, we stopped in our tracks because in the middle of that clearing was a 2-story house. There was no driveway or road that led to it. That's the first thing we checked as we went around the perimeter of the clearing. We were a bit terrified of this house and thought maybe we had gotten lost and that there must be a road nearby. But as I said before, there was nothing. There wasn't even a worn path to this house. We went back to the original spot we had came out of the woods from and just stared at this. I remember feeling absolute dread, but I couldn't seem to turn back and go home. The house itself looked old, but well kept, but there was no road to it. My sister was holding my hand at this point, and we were still just standing there, staring, and it was getting darker and darker. Then my eyes go to one window at the top part of the house. There was a flickering light. There was something rocking back and forth that would blot out the light when it rocked one way and then rocked the other way. My sister squeezed my hand so tight that my fingers went numb, and that jarred me out of my stupor. I tell her that we should go. I look down at my hand and try to shake it off, and then she starts crying, and she says, "It's waving high." I remember I literally started shaking at that point. I look up, and sure enough, there's an arm up now, rocking opposite of the body in a wave-like gesture. I was done at that point, pulling her hand that still clawed at mine, and we hightailed it out of there. We ran for a good 10 minutes before making it to our fort, which confused me. We had walked a lot farther. The sky was starting to get brighter, but I still wanted to get out. We caught our breath and began running again until we got home. My sister and I had stopped crying at this point, but Mom, who I swear to God had to be some sort of mind reader, asked what was wrong. She could tell. My sister tells her, and I get in trouble for making up stories and scaring her. I storm off, and we just ignore it after that. I remember occasionally throughout the years, and every time I remember it, I get a sense of dread and start shaking. Fast forward to a few years ago. My dad passed away. I am at my mom's house consoling her and grieving as well. My sister is there. Randomly, we start talking about how my dad loved horror movies and things like that. I remember that day in the woods so vividly, I nearly start shaking again. Later that night, after my mom is asleep, I ask my sister about it. As soon as I say that house in the woods, she freezes up. I ask her what she remembers, and she describes in exact detail what I remember. Then she said that a few years ago, she asked our dad about it, since he grew up there as well. And he knew so much about the area's history. He laughed at her and said, "Oh, honey, there's nothing in those backwoods for miles and miles." Yet her and I both remember it so vividly. It feels like it happened just yesterday when we try to talk about it. The next day, I decided I was going to go back to the woods and check it out. I spent half a day out there and found absolutely nothing. To this day, I can't explain what we saw. I think exploring in the woods is just something that all of us country kids did growing up. So I'd love to hear from you. Did you have any weird experiences exploring in the woods when you was growing up? Did you see any houses that wasn't there the next time you were out? Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the stories. If you did, give me a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, leave me a comment down below, And as always, thanks for listening. Music by Carl Casey of White Bat Audio.